right, so you ready to like jump into some seriously sneaky stuff?
Yeah.
You send over a ton of articles and research about like all the tricks companies are using to get us to spend more.
Right.
And wow, some of this stuff is wild.
It is.
It really is. We're gonna be talking about how they design products to like die sooner than they should,
Hmm.
and also like the crazy ways they play with prices to make us think we're getting a good deal when we're really not.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating how a lot of these tactics, they kind of like tap into our deepest desires, like wanting the latest gadget or just that convenience of instant gratification.
Oh yeah.
And sometimes that like leads us right into these carefully crafted traps.
Yeah, totally. And it's not just about feeling tricked either.
Right.
It's like this has real implications for like our wallets and even the environment.
Yeah.
But hey, forewarned is forearmed, right?
Right.
So let's unpack some of these sneaky tactics. And I think this first one is really, really interesting, kind of unsettling. You know how like we're all glued to our smartphones these days?
Yeah.
Well, what if I told you that some ride-hailing apps might be using that to their advantage?
Oh, you're talking about that study from 2023?
Yeah.
The one where that Belgian newspaper was like looking into Uber's pricing?
Uh-huh.
And they found that when your phone battery was low, the app would show higher fares for like the same ride
Yeah.
compared to a phone with like full battery.
Yeah. That's the one. I mean, it is kind of clever from a business perspective,
Yeah.
but also kind of predatory,
Yeah. It
don't you think? Like preying on people when they're maybe a little stressed about being stranded with a dead phone.
yeah, it definitely raises some questions about like ethical data use.
Totally.
Like makes you wonder, what other information are they using to kind of tailor these prices? You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, are they looking at our location data, our browsing history, our social media activity even,
right.
to figure out how much we're willing to pay?
It's like the Wild West out there.
It is. It's a little scary.
Yeah.
Totally.
It feels very slippery slopey.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to another tactic that's been around for ages, but it
Yeah.
seems like it's getting more sophisticated,
Right.
and that's planned obsolescence.
Yeah.
So can you help us break this down? What exactly is planned obsolescence?
Yeah.
How does it affect us as consumers?
So planned obsolescence is basically the idea that companies, they design products with a limited lifespan so that you're like forced to replace them sooner.
Right.
It's almost like they're building in like an expiration date,
I know.
you know? Think about smartphones.
Okay.
Like, remember back in the day when you could just easily swap out a dying battery for a fresh one? Like, it was so easy. Now, try doing that with like the latest models.
Yeah, I know.
It's a nightmare.
It is.
They're practically glued shut.
Yeah.
You need like specialized tools and skills to even try.
It's so true. I remember when changing a phone battery was like a 5-minute job.
Yeah.
Now it's like you need an engineering degree.
You do. You do.
Yeah. And it's not just batteries either. They also use software updates to like slow down older phones, which makes them really frustrating to use, and it just pushes you towards that upgrade.
Exactly.
So speaking of, remember that whole Apple controversy a few years back?
Oh, yeah.
When they got slapped with those huge fines in Italy and France back in 2018 and 2020?
Yes.
What were like the wider implications of those fines for the tech industry? Did it actually change anything?
Well, those fines definitely like brought the issue of planned obsolescence into the spotlight.
Okay.
And it definitely like sparked a lot of debate and discussion, you know, and some people argue that it forced companies like Apple to be a little bit more transparent about their software updates and how they might impact performance.
Yeah.
But other people say it didn't really change much in the grand scheme of things.
Okay.
Planned obsolescence is still kind of deeply ingrained in our consumer culture.
Yeah, it makes you wonder what motivates companies to engage in these practices in the first place.
Yeah.
Is it just purely about profit, or are there other things at play?
Well, I mean, profit is definitely a major driver, but there's also like that whole psychological aspect to it.
Uh-huh.
Companies know that we're constantly bombarded with messages about like new and improved products, and they play on our desire for like the latest gadgets, the newest features, just like keeping up with everyone else.
Yeah.
So even if our old phone still works perfectly fine, we might be tempted to upgrade simply because there's a newer, shinier model out there.
Right.
It's like a status symbol.
It is.
It's a way to kind of signal that we're on trend and, all that.
It's interesting how those psychological factors play into it.
Yeah.
But also, let's not forget about like the environmental impact of all this.
Right.
The research you sent mentioned that smartphones are like a major contributor to e-waste.
Absolutely. All those discarded phones, laptops, and other gadgets, they pile up.
Yeah.
And it creates this massive environmental problem.
Right.
Smartphones alone account for a whopping 10% of global e-waste.
Wow.
And it's a growing problem.
It is a growing problem.
And these devices, they contain valuable metals and minerals.
Yeah.
But instead of being recycled properly, they often end up in landfills where they can leach harmful substances into the soil and water.
It's really alarming when you think about it.
It is.
And it's not just electronics, right?
No.
Planned obsolescence seems to be like creeping into other industries too.
It does, yeah.
So what about this idea of like shrinking products but keeping the prices the same?
Oh, yeah.
Isn't there a term for that?
That's called shrinkflation.
Shrinkflation, okay.
It's a sneaky way for companies to deal with rising costs without actually raising prices.
Right.
They simply reduce the size of the product while keeping the packaging and the price the same.
Okay.
So you might not even notice it at first.
All right.
But if you compare it to older packaging, you'll see the difference.
Yeah, the research mentions some pretty wild examples like Maggi, the instant noodle brand, reduced their packet size from 80 grams to 55 grams.
Wow.
And those classic 200 milliliter bottles of Thumbs Up and Coca-Cola are now down to 180 milliliters.
Really?
Yeah. Like, I remember when those bottles felt so much bigger in my hand.
I know what you mean.
And it's a global phenomenon. We see it in the U.S. too.
Right.
Domino's Pizza reduced the size of their pizzas. Tillamook, the ice cream brand, shrunk their pint containers.
Wow.
It's almost like a game of the difference in the supermarket aisles.
It is.
I know. Makes you wonder. It's nothing sacred.
Right.
But speaking of sneaky tactics, what about all those fancy buzzwords companies use to make their products sound super innovative?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The art of buzzword bingo.
Yes.
Companies love to capitalize on the hype around emerging technologies, even if the actual application in their product is minimal or even non-existent.
Right.
It's all about creating a perception of cutting-edge technology, even if it's just smoke and mirror.
Like those so-called AI-powered washing machines.
Right.
What does that even mean?
Yeah, it's meant to sound impressive.
Yeah.
Right. AI is like the hot new thing, so slapping that label on a product, it can make it seem more desirable and futuristic.
Right.
But when you dig deeper, you often find that the AI component is pretty basic.
Okay.
Maybe it can adjust the wash cycle based on the load size.
Right.
But it's hardly revolutionary.
Right.
It's more about marketing than genuine technological advancement.
I bet a lot of people are buying those AI washing machines thinking they're getting something truly innovative.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Like, what are some other examples of this buzzword washing we should be aware of?
Well, you see it everywhere. Skincare products with nanotechnology, headphones with biometric sensors, even coffee makers with smart features.
Oh, yeah.
It's important to look beyond those flashy marketing terms and really understand what you're getting,
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to ask questions, read reviews, do your research before you buy it.
That's great advice. Don't let those buzzwords blind you.
Exactly.
Okay, so speaking of clever marketing tactics, let's talk about a classic, the razor blade model.
Oh, yeah, the model where they get you with like the cheap initial purchase, and then they hook you on the expensive refills. Like printers and their ridiculously priced ink cartridges.
Yes.
They're like the poster child for this strategy. You can often get a printer for like a steal.
Yeah.
But then you're stuck buying their overpriced ink for years to come.
Oh my gosh. I knew printer ink was expensive, but I had no idea it was this bad.
Oh, it's bad.
They said in one of the articles that ink is actually more expensive than human blood.
Oh my God.
That's insane.
That is insane.
It really is, but it's a brilliant business model, though.
It is.
When you think about it, they lock you into their ecosystem.
Totally.
And you're essentially like captive to their pricing.
Yeah.
And it's all about those recurring revenues, those little drips of profit that add up over time.
Exactly.
It's like a subscription service for ink.
It is.
Because you didn't really sign up for it.
Right. Exactly.
What other industries use this model to keep us hooked?
Oh, plenty. Think about video game consoles and their exclusive games.
Right.
You buy the console at like a relatively affordable price, but then you're stuck buying their expensive games, which can cost, upwards of $60 each.
Right, right.
Or like coffee machines that use proprietary pods. You get like a fancy machine for a decent price, but then you're tied to buying their expensive coffee pods.
Wow. It really is everywhere.
It is.
It really highlights the importance of looking beyond that initial purchase price and considering the long-term costs.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Factor in those recurring expenses before you commit.
Yeah.
Because it might seem like a good deal up front, but it could end up costing you a lot more in the long run.
That is a great point. But what happens when those products that we're locked into inevitably break down?
Right.
Are warranties actually worth the paper they're printed on?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the answer is often, it depends.
Yeah.
Sometimes warranties offer genuine protection, but a lot of times they're riddled with loopholes and exclusions that can make them practically useless.
Yeah, like that case of Madan Raj from Bangalore back in 2014.
Oh, yeah.
He bought an IFB washing machine with a 4-year warranty.
Wow.
But when it broke down a year later, they refused to fix it.
Oh, no.
What happened there?
Well, IFB claimed that the broken part, the top cover, wasn't covered under warranty.
Oh, wow.
But Madan argued that his warranty card clearly stated that all parts were covered.
Right.
And so he ended up taking IFB to court over this misleading warranty claim.
Wow.
It's a reminder that companies can sometimes make promises that they don't intend to keep.
That's so frustrating. It feels like such a betrayal of trust.
It does.
What can we do to protect ourselves from these misleading warranty claims?
The best defense is to read the fine print carefully.
Okay.
Look for any exclusions or limitations on coverage.
And don't be afraid to ask questions and clarify anything that seems unclear.
Good advice. Knowledge is power.
It is.
Especially when it comes to navigating this complex world of warranties.
Absolutely.
But let's move on to another area where companies can get really tricky, and that's pricing.
Yes, the art of pricing psychology.
It is.
There are so many ways companies can manipulate prices to make us think we're getting a bargain, even when we're not.
It's true. Like, this whole concept of drip pricing.
Oh, yeah.
It's something I've definitely encountered online.
Yeah.
You see a fantastic price for a product,
Mm-hmm.
but then at checkout, they start adding on all these extra fees and charges.
Yes.
And suddenly the final price is much higher than what you initially expected.
It's a classic bait and switch tactic.
It is.
They hook you with a low price.
Yeah.
And then they slowly drip in those extra costs, hoping that you either won't notice or that you just won't bother to back out of the purchase.
Right.
You know, it preys on our tendency to focus on that initial enticing price.
And kind of underestimate the impact of those added fees.
Yeah.
So by the time you realize the true cost, you're already like invested in the purchase process.
It's so true. And the research mentioned some really good examples like buying shoes online.
Right.
You see a great price, but then they hit you with handling charges, donation fees, platform fees, and who knows what else.
Right.
And by the time you reach the final checkout page, the price has jumped significantly.
Yeah.
It's especially prevalent in the travel and hospitality industries.
Oh, yeah.
You find a fantastic deal on a flight or hotel, but then they pile on baggage fees, resort fees, all these sneaky charges that inflate the final price.
It's crazy.
It's infuriating. It feels like they're trying to pull a fast one on us.
They are.
What are some other pricing tactics we should be wary of?
Well, another common one is that classic bait and switch.
Okay.
You see an amazing deal advertised for a specific product, like, say, a 50-inch TV.
Okay.
But then when you get to the store, they tell you it's sold out.
Oh, yeah.
And then they try to steer you towards a smaller, more expensive model.
Oh, I've definitely fallen for that one before.
I have too.
You go in all excited for that amazing deal, and then they try to upsell you on something completely different.
Exactly.
And it's frustrating.
It is.
It's all part of their game plan.
It is.
They know that once you're in the store, you're more likely to make a purchase.
Right.
Even if it's not the one you originally intended.
Exactly.
It feels like a constant battle to stay one step ahead of these tactics.
It does.
But this is just the beginning, right?
Oh, yeah.
We got a lot more to unpack.
We do.
So let's take a quick pause here and come back with even more insights from your deep dive into this sneaky world of consumerism.
Sounds good.
So, welcome back. Before the break, we were just talking about some of those bait and switch tactics.
Right.
But it seems like even when a product is available, companies still have some tricks up their sleeves when it comes to pricing, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so there's this whole other layer of pricing weirdness.
Yes.
That makes you wonder, like, is this a mistake?
Yeah.
Or is this like deliberate strategy?
Right.
Remember that tweet from Saurabh Sharma about the suitcase?
Oh, yeah.
The one where he found the exact same suitcase on 2 different shopping apps, but the prices were like wildly different.
Oh, I remember that.
One app had it listed for like a single rupee.
Wow.
While the other one was selling it for $4,799.99.
That's crazy.
That's insane.
Yeah.
And there was like similar stories in the news too.
Yeah.
Like in January of this year, reports came out about onions selling for $3 per kilo on one app.
What?
While another one had like 500 grams of grapes for $6.
Oh my gosh.
Like, how is that even possible?
I know.
It feels like they're just making numbers up at this point.
Yeah.
And then there was that iPhone 7.
Uh-huh.
Listed at like 149 on one platform.
Wow.
But going for a whopping 50 lakh on another.
50 lakh.
50 lakh.
That's not a typo.
That's not a typo, Ufi lakh.
Wow.
At that point, you kind of have to wonder if it's intentional.
Yeah.
Like they're hoping people won't bother to compare prices.
Right.
Or they'll just assume it's a glitch.
Right. Right.
You know?
It's definitely a little suspicious.
It is.
I don't know if they're honest mistakes or if they're kind of testing the waters.
Yeah.
You know, to see how much they can get away with.
Yeah, it really makes you think about the lack of transparency in online pricing.
Yeah, it does.
It's like a wild, wild west out there.
It is.
Speaking of which, let's shift gears a bit and talk about like the bigger picture here.
Okay.
We've discussed how these consumer trends impact our wallets.
Right.
But what about like their impact on the environment?
That's a crucial aspect that often gets overlooked. You
Yeah.
know, this constant push for newer, shinier products. It has a huge environmental cost.
Yeah.
Think about all the resources that go into manufacturing these devices.
Right.
The mining, the energy, the transportation.
And then after a few years, when they're deemed obsolete, what happens?
They just end up in landfills, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
We generate mountains of electronic waste, or e-waste.
Yeah.
And a lot of it ends up in developing countries.
Right.
Where it's often processed in unsafe and environmentally harmful ways.
It's a massive problem.
It is a massive problem.
The research highlighted the sheer volume of this e-waste.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling that smartphones alone contribute 10% of global e-waste.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the waste itself.
No.
It's also about, like, the resources that are used to create these products in the first place.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We're depleting precious resources at an alarming rate to feed this insatiable demand for the latest gadgets.
Yeah.
It's simply not sustainable in the long run.
Right.
We need to start thinking about the entire life cycle of a product from its creation to its disposal.
So what's the solution here?
Right.
How do we break this cycle of consume and discard?
Well, it's a complex issue with no easy answers.
Yeah. But one crucial step is to shift our mindset from a linear take, make, dispose model
Okay.
to a more circular economy where resources are reused.
Right.
And products are designed for longevity and repairability.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But how do we make that happen?
Right.
Is it all on us as consumers to make more sustainable choices?
Right.
Or do companies and governments have a role to play here?
It's a shared responsibility.
Yeah.
Consumers can certainly make a difference by choosing durable products,
Okay.
repairing instead of replacing, and supporting companies that prioritize sustainability.
Okay.
But we also need action from companies and governments to create a system that encourages these behaviors.
What kind of actions?
Well, governments can implement policies that incentivize sustainable practices,
Right.
like tax breaks for companies that produce durable goods, or extended producer responsibility programs
Okay.
that hold manufacturers accountable for the end-of-life management of their products.
That's interesting. Are there any examples of governments taking these kinds of steps?
Absolutely.
Okay.
For example, the European Union introduced right-to-repair rules in 2021.
Okay.
These rules are designed to combat planned obsolescence
Okay.
by requiring manufacturers to make spare parts available for a minimum of 10 years
Wow.
and to design products that are easier to repair.
That sounds like a great initiative.
It is.
Do those rules apply to like all products, or are there like specific industries that they target?
Initially, the focus was on appliances like refrigerators, washing machines, and televisions.
Okay.
But the EU is looking to expand the scope of these rules to include smartphones and other electronic devices in the future.
That makes sense. Electronic devices are such a major source of e-waste.
They are.
It'd be great if like companies were held accountable
Yeah.
for making their products more repairable and durable.
Exactly. It's about shifting the responsibility from the consumer to the producer. Instead of expecting consumers to constantly buy new devices, we need companies to design products that are built to last and to be easily repaired.
That's a great point. It would also save consumers money in the long run.
Yeah.
If they didn't have to replace their devices so frequently.
Absolutely.
But what about other areas where consumers need more protection?
Right.
Like misleading advertising or unethical marketing practices.
Mm-hmm.
What role do governments play in regulating those areas?
Governments have a crucial role in setting standards and enforcing regulations that protect consumers from deceptive practices.
Okay.
For instance, India's medical council prohibits doctors from endorsing commercial products.
What's the rationale behind that rule?
Well, it's intended to prevent misleading claims in advertising.
Right.
Especially for healthcare products.
Yeah.
You know, like those toothpaste ads that claim to be the dentist's choice.
Right.
Without any real evidence to back it up.
Right.
That kind of marketing can be very persuasive, especially when it comes from a trusted authority figure like a doctor.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
Consumers might be more inclined to believe a product claim if it seems to have the endorsement of like a medical professional.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's why it's important to have regulations in place to prevent companies from exploiting those trust relationships.
It's interesting to see how these regulations vary across different countries and industries.
Yeah.
But speaking of like historical examples, remember that shocking story about the Phoebus cartel we touched on earlier?
Oh, yeah.
The one where light bulb manufacturers conspired to limit the lifespan of their bulbs.
Yeah, it's wild.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes. The Phoebus cartel.
Yeah.
It's a classic example of planned obsolescence taken to the extreme back in the 1920s.
Okay.
A group of leading light bulb manufacturers, including Osram, Philips, and General Electric.
Wow, the big ones.
The big ones.
Yeah.
They formed a cartel to control the global light bulb market.
So they were essentially colluding.
Yeah.
To keep prices high and profits flowing.
Precisely. And one of their key strategies was to artificially limit the lifespan of their light bulbs. Before the cartel, light bulbs could last for thousands of hours.
Wow.
But the cartel agreed to standardize the lifespan of their bulbs to around 1,000 hours.
Wait, so they intentionally made their product worse?
They did.
Why would they do that?
It all boils down to profits.
Right.
By reducing the lifespan of their bulbs, they ensured that consumers would have to buy replacements more frequently,
Okay.
thus boosting their sales and profits.
Right.
It was a blatant case of putting corporate greed ahead of consumer interests and environmental sustainability.
It's amazing how they managed to get away with that for so long.
I know, right?
How did the cartel eventually come to an end?
Well, like most cartels, it eventually crumbled
Right.
due to internal disputes and external pressures.
Okay.
Some members started cheating on the agreement.
Yeah, that always happens.
And consumers became increasingly aware of the cartel's practices.
Mm.
Governments also began to investigate and take action against the cartel for violating antitrust laws.
So they eventually got caught.
They did.
Yeah.
By the late 1930s, the Phoebus cartel had effectively collapsed.
It's a fascinating and somewhat disturbing story.
It is.
It shows how far companies are willing to go to maximize profits.
Yes.
Even if it means deceiving consumers and harming the environment.
Yeah. It's pretty disheartening.
It is. It also highlights the importance of government regulation and consumer awareness in combating these practices.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. We need to be vigilant and informed consumers to make sure we're not being taken advantage of.
Right.
But speaking of vigilance,
Yeah.
what are some other red flags
Yeah.
that we should watch out for when it comes to pricing and marketing tactics?
Well, one thing to be wary of is extremely low prices that seem too good to be true. They often are.
Okay.
It could be a bait and switch tactic,
Right.
a counterfeit product, or a way to lure you into a subscription service with hidden fees.
Good point. If a deal seems too good to be true,
Yeah.
it probably is.
It probably is.
What are some other warning signs?
Be skeptical of products that are heavily marketed with vague or exaggerated claims,
Okay.
like those miracle weight loss pills or skincare products that promise to erase wrinkles overnight.
Yeah.
If it sounds like hype, it probably is.
So always do your research and read reviews from reputable sources before making a purchase.
Exactly.
Okay.
Don't just take the marketing claims at face value.
Yeah.
Dig a little deeper, compare prices,
Uh-huh.
read independent reviews to get a better sense of the product's true value.
It's like they say, buyer beware.
Yes.
But sometimes, even when we're careful,
Right.
it feels like companies find ways to slip these sneaky tactics past us.
Yeah, they do.
What can we do when we feel like we've been misled or taken advantage of?
Well, the first step is to try to resolve the issue directly with the company.
Okay.
Contact their customer service department and explain the situation. If that doesn't work, you can escalate the issue to a consumer protection agency or consider taking legal action if warranted.
Okay, that's good advice. It's important to know our rights as consumers
Yes.
and to not be afraid to stand up for them.
Absolutely.
Companies need to be held accountable for their actions,
They do.
and consumers have a right to fair and transparent treatment.
Absolutely.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation.
It has.
We've covered so much ground.
We have.
From sneaky pricing strategies to the environmental impact of consumerism to the importance of government regulation.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
I want to leave our listeners with one final thought-provoking question.
Right.
We've been talking about all these ways companies try to, boost their profits.
Right.
And how some of it feels, well, a little manipulative, right?
Yeah.
But there's another piece of this puzzle we haven't really touched on yet. What about the role of government? Regulations. Like, can they actually do anything to, keep these practices in check? Protect consumers?
Well, that's a huge point. I mean, governments absolutely have a responsibility to protect consumers from, those unfair and deceptive business practices.
Oh, right.
And they can do that through legislation, enforcement, public awareness campaigns, all of that.
So it's not just on us as individuals to make, smart choices.
Right.
There needs to be like a system in place.
Yes.
That sets some ground rules and actually holds companies accountable.
Exactly. Think of it like a referee in a sports game.
Okay.
You need someone to make sure everyone is playing fair and following the rules.
Right.
Otherwise, it's just chaos.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Right.
Are there any, real-world examples of where governments have actually stepped in and, successfully protected consumers in these situations?
Absolutely. Those European Union right to repair rules we talked about earlier, that's a perfect example. Those were introduced in 2021, and they aim to, combat planned obsolescence by requiring companies to provide spare parts for at least 10 years.
Wow.
And to design products that are easier to repair.
So they're forcing companies to make products that are more durable.
Yes.
More repairable.
Exactly.
Okay, that seems like a big step in the right direction.
It is. It really shifts the focus from constantly buying new products to extending the life of the products we already have.
Yeah.
And it gives consumers that power, the option to repair their devices instead of being forced to replace them.
Makes you wonder why these rules aren't more widespread.
I know.
Why isn't everyone doing this?
Well, it often comes down to this battle between consumer interests and corporate interests.
Okay.
Companies, they lobby really hard against regulations that they see as cutting into their profits.
Right.
While consumer advocacy groups, they push for those stronger protections.
Yeah, so it's a classic power struggle. But it sounds like the EU is kind of leading the charge here.
They are.
When it comes to consumer protection in this area.
Yes.
What about other countries?
Yeah.
Any notable examples?
India's medical council's prohibition on doctors endorsing commercial products.
Oh, right.
That's a great example.
Okay, and that aims to
curb those misleading claims in advertising.
Okay.
Especially for healthcare products.
That's right. So no more toothpaste ads with, dentists flashing pearly white smiles.
Exactly.
Probably a good thing for consumers.
It is. It helps level the playing field. Make sure that consumers are making decisions based on accurate information, not misleading endorsements. It's about promoting that transparency and building trust.
That does sound like a smart move to protect consumers.
Yes.
Especially, for health-related products.
Absolutely.
Where trust is so important.
It is.
But thinking back, haven't there always been attempts to manipulate consumers?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, even before the digital age?
Absolutely. The Phoebus cartel, remember?
The light bulb conspiracy.
Yes.
That was pretty shocking.
It was a blatant attempt to control the market and keep consumers in the dark.
Wow.
Both literally and figuratively.
Yeah, and it shows that these tactics, they're not new.
No, they're not.
It's a little disheartening to think about.
It is.
But it also shows these issues have been around.
Right.
We've been grappling with them for decades.
We have.
So, if this is an ongoing battle, what can we do, as consumers, to protect ourselves and promote a more ethical and sustainable marketplace?
Well, the key is to be an informed and engaged consumer.
Okay.
Don't be passive. Question everything.
Okay.
Read the fine print. Compare prices. Research products thoroughly before you buy them.
So don't just click buy on the first flashy ad you see.
No, exactly.
Okay.
Take the time to educate yourself about the products you're interested in, the companies that make them, their environmental and social impact.
Okay.
Support businesses that align with your values,
Right.
and prioritize ethical practices.
And what about when we see something that seems unfair
Yeah.
or deceptive?
Yeah.
Should we just shrug it off, or is there something we can actually do?
Don't just accept it. Speak up.
Okay.
Share your experiences with others.
Mm-hmm.
Write reviews, contact consumer protection agencies,
Yeah.
advocate for stronger regulation.
Well, our individual actions can actually make a difference here.
They absolutely can.
Okay.
Collective consumer action can have a real impact.
Wow.
It can force companies to change their practices,
Uh-huh.
governments to implement stronger protections.
Yeah.
Remember, you have a voice,
Mm-hmm.
and your choices matter.
It's not just about being a savvy shopper.
Right.
It's about being a responsible citizen.
Exactly. It's about creating a marketplace that benefits everyone, not just the corporations.
Right.
It's about building a system that's fair, transparent, and sustainable.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. I feel like we've covered so much.
Yeah, we have.
From those sneaky tactics companies use
Right.
to the role of government in consumer protection.
Yes.
It's clear that there's a lot to be aware of as we navigate this complex world of consumerism.
There is.
But I think the biggest takeaway here is to be aware,
Yes.
to be informed,
be empowered.
and to be empowered.
Knowledge is your best defense against these tactics.
So true. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
We hope you learned something new
Yes.
and that you feel, inspired to be a more conscious and engaged consumer.
Absolutely.
Happy shopping out there.
Yes. Happy shopping.
And until next time, stay curious.